Hello, it's daytime now. You're listening to Baroki's vlogs, or watching them maybe, watching my big head. I actually have quite a small head, relative to most people, but not relative to the size of the shot. And that's why I've got my hair so boofy, because then it can compensate for the size of my head. Trying to fit in it with everybody, all these big-headed people. So I've got this list on my phone of topics to address in these vlogs. The next topic I've gotten written down is creation in a scientific world. And so I'm going to ramble about that a little. First things that come to mind are the fact that the scientific method is a bit weird, because it kind of tries to strip value from its whole perspective. So it kind of goes the way we can get a lot of power. Like, clearly the scientific method is very powerful. We can get a lot of power by saying, let's try and pretend we're not here. let's look at an object. Let's look at this rock as if it didn't have like meaning to us personally or collectively. Let's look at it purely in terms of its construction, like outside us, regardless of what it does and means for us. But I think that's a decent summary of a sort of a scientific, maybe I guess it's really a material view of the world, and you can see the world like that, and if you see the world like that, you can figure a lot of stuff out, and it's great. But science kind of has to exist within a moral framework, because it doesn't contain any ethics in it. It's kind of deliberately removed all that stuff, or the moral, what is it, the good, it's concerned with the true, I guess. There's the good, the true, and the beautiful. It's an old Christian adage, I think. Old Christian additive. It's like MSG or something from the early hundreds. What was I talking about? Yeah, science does that, and I think our worldview now in the West, let's say, or at least in Australia and in France, where I now live. Although France is a little different. I think, who knows, another topic, I'll write that down actually, the differences I've noticed between Australia and France. But let's just, if you'll grant me that we kind of live in a fairly material perspective. I listened recently to a Christian called Jonathan Pageau, who loves symbolism, and that's how I got into him, is he's really interested in the symbolism of Christianity. And what it can mean for us now. But I was listening to him, and he said, what did he say? He reckons even the most devout priests, let's say, tend to have a fairly material worldview, just because of the effect of science. And he also said, which I really love, that, and actually this could have been his brother as well. He's got a brother called Matthew, who he has some discussions with, so it might have been his brother who said this, but one of the Pageaus in this discussion said that, amusingly, perhaps, or interestingly, the scientist has been the most effective preserver of something like faith or like the Christian ethic or something, in the sense that the scientist has continued to try to marry heaven and earth, to marry the material with the conceptual, let's say. So they try and have a theory and then try and make it match the material world, right? Like that's kind of the vibe, is you come up with hypotheses, and you see if they match the world, and sometimes you're really lucky and they do. Which kind of brings me back to that point that the scientific method kind of has to come up with these hypotheses and then act like the process by which they came about doesn't exist. because we have this sort of, we just don't talk about hypothesis generation in science. I mean, maybe, I'm sure someone's actually tried to study it scientifically, but it's still sort of, it sits outside of, like, you're not going to write about it you're not going to write about how you came about the hypothesis in the sort of, in the human terms, in the value-laden terms that you would. Like, if you explain how you got to your hypothesis in your introduction of your scientific paper, you'll basically say, other people did this work, and then somehow this new idea was generated that I had for this study. And you can just say, like, somehow, you can just say, and therefore it makes sense to do my study. But my study actually contains all these blooms of insight or inspiration, where you've decided to change things, and like, why precisely did you choose that, like, that change? I don't know. Yeah. I think that's enough. My point is just that there's a creative element in the scientific practice that kind of just doesn't get addressed most of the time. And at school, in our material world, I would say that the time, of course, we are asked to do creative writing and that kind of thing, but most of the majority of the creative activity we do is actually in criticism. So we're asked to write essays, for example. That's the one time that we're asked to make a whole, and we actually make it out of criticism, which is, to me, is kind of the antithesis of creation, because it's poking holes in things. That's what criticism does. It's destructive. It is in a wonderful way. And that's kind of what the scientific method is doing. It's dividing things up. It's deconstructionism. It probably doesn't quite relate to deconstructionist concept, but yeah, it's deconstructing things, and that's quite cool. But quite contrary. I think we're very good at noticing the flaws in things, and we might even, maybe humans are just like that. We're a bit better at tearing stuff down than building stuff up. I don't know. Actually, that sounds wrong in terms of our actions, but maybe not our words, or maybe we're entering a renewed era of destructive tendency. I'm going to leave it there because I'm getting a bit lost in. You may have noticed that my brain, that I just kind of leap around and have new idea after new idea and have not sewn them together very well. So I hope you enjoy watching probably some just random jumps that I'm not yet aware of, that I'll notice, jumps in logic, jumps in topic. Anyway, I'm going to try and finish this to say that, yeah, I think we get taught quite well, and maybe it's just easier to teach, to deconstruct, to notice, to search for a fault. You know, like you're looking at a wall, or a cliff face, and you're looking for a big notch in it or a crack, and then you can find one, and you can work that, you can illuminate it. Maybe you can shove your chisel into it and crack the cliff or the wall further open, and that's what you're doing when you're engaging in criticism. Whereas in creation, we have this big magical sort of mythos around it, which I don't know. It's kind of fun, but it also is quite problematic. I think we see artists as people who are these channels for the magical, for God, or who are these geniuses who are really unusual in the way that they take an idea and they change it, or they just get given ideas, by something like God, which, like, as an experience is actually not wrong. I think, like, I'm a creative person, and I've frequently just been socked in the face with this. I just get given a song or an image, and I'm like, wow, thank you, ether or God or something, and so experientially that makes sense, but it's not a very nuanced way of seeing it, not very scientific, I guess. Yeah. And it's interesting that it sort of sits out there because there's maybe it's just too complicated. for science to deal with really well. For example, I know that lots of studies been done on creative people, on what seems to make creative people different. You can do that, but the actual act of creating is so subjective, and creative people seem to be defined by the fact that they're kind of different to everybody. So like they're all a bit different from each other too. There's not a lot of unifying stuff, other than maybe I think the Big Five work seems to notice that. I think Jordan Peterson's done some work on creative people, and he's talked about this. So that's where I'm getting that very vague information. But yeah, the high on trait openness in the Big Five, apparently. And the Big Five is, yeah, like quite a solid construct in psychology, which is saying something. I'm so skeptical. I'm a psychology student, and it's very hard to have much confidence in a lot of the work that is done for me. I'm very skeptical because we're studying such big stuff in such strange, particular ways. Anyway, topic for another day. So another person, I've already talked about Jonathan Pageau. He mentions in a different lecture that, in a really old sense, to be critical without being creative, according to like the fathers, like old sort of conceptual writers about Christianity, people like Maximus the Confessor. I think Maximus is just the name that comes up most often with Pageau. But apparently people like that described criticism without creation as diabolical. That to criticize without creating, without contributing, I guess, kind of like a replacement to build something in the place of what you're tearing down. If to criticize is to tear down in some way, which I think it is. Maybe that's there are objections to that, to making that equivalence, but I'm just going to brush over them for now. And then maybe that would imply that creation in harmony with criticism is something more godly, more heavenly, something like that. I don't know. Fun concept though, I reckon. Maybe that can be another video. The difference between criticism and destruction. And so I think, maybe it's a bit harder to really understand, or we see it as harder to teach how we create. And I don't have a great solution for like teaching creativity better, although there are some wonderful works, but it's funny how quickly they descend into the religious. And we're obviously very skeptical nowadays of the religious, which I think is a shame. And Pageau, I'm learning a lot from Jonathan Pageau in terms of how science and religion just don't have to conflict at all, really. It's very easy to be like deeply religious without believing that your text makes material world claims. That's not necessary to like enjoy. Like, you don't have to believe that the Red Sea was parted and that, a flood actually happened and an ark was built. You can, but it's not necessary. So it's quite exciting for me. But there's a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, which is so much fun. I strongly recommend it. She's kind of like a new age thinker, probably. I think she was very into Carl Jung. She's got a bunch of his quotes, and some of the work in the book feels very related to his work. And she just kind of guides you through lots of exercises. But it's funny how, like, immediately in this process, ritual is required of you. It's like on the first page, she's like, I need you to do these 2 rituals every week. The morning pages, where you write 3 pages freehand, and the artist date, where you take yourself on a date. But I do think that if we want to understand creativity better, I think a lot of that understanding lies in the religious, or it certainly seems that way, because this is the best, most popular creativity book I know about, as in the most people I've talked to have heard of it, and it was a bestseller in many times. I think The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. I think its success is due to the fact that it sort of brings religion back into the world without requiring you to be subject to a dogma or participate in organized religion or anything like that. But it's a deeply religious book. It's about showing up for ritual and examining what you think is good and what you think is right, what you think is true. Sorry, good and right. Yeah. Good, true, and beautiful, essentially, to bring us back to that Christian adage, which I got from Pajot and other people he's talked to. So, so I think to conclude, all I know really about creating in a scientific world, and I seem to do it quite successfully. Like I engage in some sort of creative activity every day. What I know about that is that it's deeply interlinked with living a good life, with living something that has a balance of stability and novelty in it, of discipline and impulsivity, let's say. It seems to be deeply interlinked with living in a way that you don't have to be to criticize. I think you can really, that's kind of how the scientific works a little bit, is you can be like a disembodied head and just go around criticizing everything, and that works really well. But it mostly works to break things apart and to unify, to create a unifying structure. I think it's no surprise that we have fewer of those things like communities. The internet's quite cool in that the internet is a unifying structure, but I don't know. I guess actually, maybe just criticism and unifying creation are two sides of the same coin, but they exist maybe in different parts of the human. It does seem to be a trend that it's very hard to write and edit at the same time. Most people give the advice that you should write your essay or your chapter or whatever it is before you edit it. You just splurge and then you whittle it down afterwards and critique it. So I feel like that was a fun conversation with myself that I've had, a fun little exploration, but it's caused me to realize I don't really know what it means to create in a scientific world, other than that it's like a real curiosity, and the fact that I don't feel like I have any good answers except these vague directions towards the religious impulse and towards ritual and towards like living a good life, whatever that means to you. There's also like lots of like the Artist's Way is kind of like a 12-week course of DIY psychotherapy. So there's probably a lot of it's about unblocking and finding what is stymieing you, what is shining light on all the obstacles between you and the act of creation. Because there are lots, even for the least blocked of us, I think. Sometimes we get scared, sometimes we can't, we start getting critical and it gets in the way. We start thinking, this isn't going to be useful. Maybe I'll finish by just saying this, that I, when talking about the religious, as some of a lot of creation maybe is an act of faith when in the moment of it happening. Julia Cameron has she says, leap and the net will appear, which I love. And so I suppose have deep faith in the creative process. I think all the greatest anythings that we experience are sort of acts of creation in some form or other. I guess if we really love like nature, trees and that kind of thing, they're more like, we see those as godly creations in the ancient world. They're creations, but not by humans. They're creations by other trees, etc., by the conspiring of the natural elements. But I guess we are that too. And so actually that's something Julia Cameron mentions is try and see yourself as utterly interconnected with the world. We are organisms doing what we do. But yeah, I would like to leave you with the fact that where else would solutions for the future of humanity, achieving new unity, new reductions in suffering, new meaning, new beauty, where else would that come from than the act of creation? So have faith in yours and your small part that you have to play. And I see myself, I have a small part to play. I make these songs and a few people hear them, and I make these videos and a few people watch them, and maybe one of those people will make something else, and maybe that'll be experienced by someone else, and that person will make something else, and that person will be Elon Musk or something, someone who's causing really significant change in the world. Now that might be bad, but I think you want to be very careful in well, yes, I'll discuss. I actually have a plan. I've already written down the title of ethics, ethics and creation. So we'll talk about when it's good or bad to create in another video, I reckon. I say we. It's really just me. But I hope you, whoever you are, can enjoy this and get something from it, even if it's pretty rambly. So I think I'll finish it there. Go forth and create. Even if it's confusing, you'll learn something from it, and maybe you'll get some clarity from the act. And I'll go do the same. I've been doing the same. I think this is creation. Okay. Well, lots of love. Baroque vlog number 2, over and out.